So as an introduction, our first program is Beginning Vegetable Gardening with Grace Margherio. Grace joined U of I Extension last year as a local foods educator. She works at the Jackie Joyner Kersey Center in East St. Louis. With that, I'll turn it over to Grace.
Thanks, Susan, and good to, like I said, I can't really see you all today, but I'm glad that you're with me, and we'll explore some more about beginning vegetable gardening this morning. So hopefully by the end of the presentation, you'll be able to select the right site and setup for your garden. You'll understand the importance of soil and have resources for soil testing, and you'll be more confident in being able to grow, buy, and maintain healthy plants. So we'll first talk about site selection. For your garden space, you'll want to find a spot that has at least 6 hours of sun, of full sun a day. And it would probably be better to aim more for 8 to 10 hours of sunlight, especially if you want to grow fruiting plants like tomatoes. They want even more sun. So you'll definitely want to find a spot that gets a good amount of sun, and afternoon sun is stronger than morning sun. You'll also want to make sure that your garden is near a water source and is also hopefully convenient to your house. I know a lot of times in late summer, it's hard to get the motivation to go across town or somewhere that's, kind of a far drive or walk to take care of all of the weeds and water your garden. So making it in a convenient location is good for success. You'll also want to just think about the slope in the area that you want to put your garden. You don't want to have it so that it's constantly wet in the springtime or something like that. So making sure it's not downhill of anything, especially anything that could possibly be creating any kind of pollution or addition of nutrients, perhaps. So those are all things to keep in mind for site selection. Next, we can explore different types of gardens that you might want to have. There are lots of different kinds. You are all probably somewhat familiar with the traditional in-ground garden beds. So the first slide, or the first picture, is of a bed that you could till up by either using a tiller or double digging with your shovel to get an area aerated and ready for a garden. You could also try techniques like no dig or lasagna gardening, in which you put cardboard or something that would kill the weeds or the grass where you want to put your garden, something that's blocking out the light, and then you can layer compost on it and grow your garden that way, so it's on a berm, and that doesn't disturb the soil, as well as it might just be easier on your back to not do as much digging. There are also raised beds. The low raised bed is similar to a berm that you would create with no dig gardening, but that it has sides, often made out of wood. You can also make those deeper. The main downside to having deeper raised beds would just be that there's an increase in cost in materials to make that container, as well as the soil and compost that you would fill it with. I have somewhat deep raised beds because I live in St. Louis, in an area where there might have been some heavy metal contamination before. So I just want to make sure that my roots don't get to that. It's also just easier on my back. I can sit down on the ground and I don't have to do as much bending. Elevated raised beds are also getting really popular. That would be somewhere where you don't have to do bending at all. You could just stand up and do your gardening. And you could even make it wheelchair accessible as well.
Hey, Grace, I'm going to interject. Sorry.
Okay.
Your display is showing the next slide. Can you adjust your settings to make it be just the slide you're presenting?
Let's see. I'll stop my share for a minute. How is this?
Better.
There we go.
Okay, good. I'm sorry. Okay, but yeah, these are a bunch of different containers that you can also consider. When I lived in rentals, I used a lot of 5-gallon buckets for my gardening, which was really great. You'll just want to make sure that you drill holes in 5-gallon buckets or other kind of containers that you use just to facilitate drainage. But there's a lot of varieties that will grow in smaller spaces like that. You may not be able to grow pumpkins per se, but there are usually a lot of kinds of tomatoes and peppers and herbs and even like cucumbers I've seen that are really good at growing in small spaces that are all things you can find to grow in smaller containers. I have never personally used like canvas bags, but I've heard that that works really well and that those are, you know, easily movable as well. You can get really creative with what kind of containers you want to use. So those were a few ideas of different kinds of gardens, and now we'll talk about something that's often overlooked but is very important, and that is your soil. So soil is a lot of different things. It's broken down rock, so it's mineral particles, but it's also the pore spaces for air and for water, and also you know, biological and microbial activity, broken down organic matter. So just a few things. I'm not going to go too deep into soil science today, but a few things to keep in mind would be that the soil has different textures, and that is based on the particle sizes that make up soil. So there are 3 different particle sizes: sand, silt, and clay. Sand being the biggest and clay the smallest type of particle, and then silt being in between. And you're going to want to have soil that has a combination of all those 3 types of particles. So the best probably for vegetable production would be silt. So a lot of silt in your soil is good. Structure is also very important, and that's how those particles are arranged, how they're aggregated. And you want to make sure that those particles are arranged in a way that you can have good filtration of air and water in your soil. So some things to keep in mind for structure is just that you don't want to walk or put heavy objects on your soil that compresses it. That's especially important after a rainstorm. It's easier to, you know, compress your soil and make it poorer in structure. And yeah, usually in the beginning of the season, you're going to want to kind of loosen your soil up. There are ways of doing that where you don't have to disturb the soil as much as like tilling, just using kind of like a broad fork and loosening up the soil that way. But that is also something that you're going to want to consider. And organic matter is really important in your soil. Soil is not just those mineral components, but it's also broken down biological matter. So like leaves or what we would call compost. Those are all really important, especially for other kinds of biological activity, including from bacteria and fungi. Some can actually fix nitrogen, putting nutrients into the soil. Others can make nutrients from your mineral part of the soil more accessible to your plants. So it's also really important to think about your biological activity. And so at the beginning of when you want to garden and a few years after that and so forth, you're going to want to test your soil for the basic elements that plants need, like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, as well as the pH, which is the level of soil acidity or alkalinity. Most plants want your soil to have a pH of around 6 to 6.6, but some will want it a little bit more acidic, like blueberries. But for most plants, it's at 6 to 6.6 ratio, or not ratio, but level of pH that you want in your soil. And that has to do also with the accessibility of different types of minerals in your soil. And then you also might want to test for the percentage of organic matter. And so generally, for getting a soil sample, you're going to dig into your soil 6 to 8 inches, and you're going to want to get a few different samples and kind of mix them up in a large bucket and get that to bring to your soil lab. But we're going to try to watch a little video to show how that's done. We'll see if this works. You know what? I don't think that I clicked to share my sound. Okay. Oh yeah.
Grace, sorry, we're back in that smaller view of your presentation.
Okay.
Like I said, we'd have technical issues if we were doing it in person. So totally understand.
Yeah. Well, does it look better now?
Yeah, so we see Grant there. We see your YouTube
Okay.
video.
Okay.
When it comes to getting soil from the backyard to then be sent to that soil testing lab. And we'll also talk about some of the other things you might need to consider when it comes to collecting a good sample to get the right results that you need for the upcoming growing season. At the University of Illinois Extension, we recommend getting a soil test in the fall. The reason for this is that it can take a couple months to raise or lower that soil pH, and you may find through a soil test that you have to do that. If you get the soil test in the spring, you may not have enough time to modify that soil pH before planting. Another thing that we recommend is to get a soil test maybe every 3 to 5 years. You may find that if you got a soil test every single year, that you're not going to get the same results or really see much changes. When it comes to soil sampling in your growing area, you don't need a lot of equipment. You need a good, strong shovel that can get to about 6 inches in depth, and then you need a bucket to really collect the soil that you're going to be getting. That's really it. Another thing to mention is that when it comes to actually collecting the soil, you're taking samples from around that growing area. So you can see I've got a flag here that would be a place where I would start to collect the soil. I have another flag that's about 5-6 feet away. And then throughout this growing area of my lawn, I also have places where I'm collecting the soil. It's all going into this one bucket that you see here. And from there, I'm submitting about a 1/2 cup to 1 cup of soil to that soil testing lab. The reason to do this is that it's giving you a much greater understanding and representation of this growing area compared to if you just sampled from one flag and submitted that. You'll also note that I grew a lot of vegetables this summer in raised beds, and those really need to be two separate samples because mixing the soil from the raised beds with this lawn area is not going to give me really good, accurate information when it comes to understanding what my soil is and what some of the opportunities are, as well as the challenges are when it comes to getting my soil on its right path. So here we have some soil that was collected at one of our demonstration gardens in Stevenson County. The last time we had a soil test on this was in 2014. Every year we've grown vegetables there, so we are just kind of curious at this stage as to what might be going on in our soil. Now that we have all these samples in this big bucket, we need to then create that subsample. As you look towards kind of creating that subsample, you're going to find that you need to break up some clods in there. You may also find that there is plant debris that needs to be removed. You don't want to include that in the subsample. And then you want to make sure that it's pretty dry. So you may find that if it's pretty wet, you may need to lay out that soil for a couple of days before sitting in that subsample. Once you feel pretty comfortable with this, give it a good mix. And from this bucket, we're really just going to submit about half a cup to maybe a little bit less than a cup of soil to our soil testing lab. When I reach out to a soil testing lab, they're going to send a kit, and the kits will include these sample bags. And usually they're going to make a mark as to how much soil they need. So for our kit here, I'm just going to right about here where my finger is, which is a little bit more than maybe half a cup of soil is going to be going to the soil testing lab. One of the questions that we sometimes get at the University of Illinois Extension office is, could I soil sample from my raised beds? And you certainly could. Just think about how you might be soil sampling from a lawn or another area where you're growing in the soil and adapt that to your raised beds. I have 3 raised beds I'm growing in this season, so I would want to take soil samples from all 3 of them. And I would also yet again want to take representation from different parts of those raised beds in order to then submit that subsample to the soil testing lab. When you connect with a soil testing lab and you receive a soil testing kit, typically you're going to have a document in there where you will fill out to tell the soil testing lab what you're planning to grow with the soil that you've submitted. And so this document can allow you to then get better recommendations from that soil testing lab. The soil testing lab would then be able to say that the pH on the soil should work great for the vegetables that you're growing, or they may find that the soil pH needs to be modified. It will allow the lab to say that the phosphorus, potassium levels of that soil are adequate for the vegetables or other crops you're planning to grow. And it can also give you better fertilizer recommendations too, because the soil testing lab knows what you're planning to grow. At the University of Illinois Extension, we also recommend getting a soil test before you plant a perennial plant, such as the peach tree that you see here. The reason for that is once you already have planted that perennial plant, it can be very hard to modify that soil pH. Whereas if you got that soil test performed before you planted and you realize you had to modify the soil, you would have enough time to do that. So that's this weekend Get Growing. A soil test is one of the great things that you can do to really shut down this year's summer vegetable garden and begin to think about what next year's summer vegetable garden looks like. If you haven't taken a soil test in the last 3 to 5 years, this might be a great time to do such. If you are growing in a new area that you've never grown in before, definitely think about getting a soil test for that area. The University of Illinois Extension does not endorse a particular soil testing lab over another, and we maintain a website with the contact information of soil testing labs in the Midwest. You will find a link to that website connected to today's video. For more information on resources and upcoming events, please visit extension.illinois.edu/JSW or follow us on Facebook at Northwest Illinois Local Foods. Hi there, my name is Graham McCarty.
All right, so can you now see my slide?
We still see the YouTube video.
Oh no. I thought I had the hang of this.
It's like riding a bicycle. You'll be ready on Monday because you'll know it all.
You see just that slide.
No, it's the double view.
Not sure how I can do. Okay, let's try this one. Do you see just that slide?
You're good.
Okay. Well, I hope that video was helpful, and hopefully I can get it together for the next part. But yeah, so on that YouTube video link, you should be able to also see the resources for soil testing in this area that you can use. And this is another resource that I think Sarah included in that packet of materials, which is a vegetable planting calendar. So I live in St. Louis, and this calendar would probably be true for like the Metro East area. If you live outside of that area, you're probably going to need to move the first frost date and last frost date a little bit to adjust this calendar to your area. But overall, I think it's a really good representation of generally what kinds of activities you do throughout the year for your garden. So I'll just first draw your attention to the bottom of the screen. Hopefully it's clear enough. But yeah, it has the last for spring and first fall frost dates. It also has the starting seedlings indoors, which is the time that you would start it indoors, which is that potted plant. And then that big seed is basically shows when you would direct seed something outside. That shovel shows when you would transplant a seedling outside. And then it also shows the growing period and the harvest period. So I'll go to the next slide because it's just a little bit clearer, hopefully. I enlarged it a little bit. And I thought that maybe in the chat we could just practice a little bit with this. So you can type in the chat when you would start basil inside. Although now I'm seeing that I don't, wait, I said I do have that. So yeah, in March, yes. When would you direct seed spinach outside? Hopefully you can see that you would start that in mid-March too. And you can see that some things you can start inside, but some things are best to start or just to direct seed. So like root crops like beets and a lot of leafy greens, those are just better to direct seed outside. But something like a tomato or pepper, which is going to take a long time to grow before it fruits, you're going to want to start inside. So some of those summer crops. You can also see that there's some things that you can grow in the spring and the fall, and that for those you would usually direct seed those starting in early August if you want to grow it in the fall again. So your cole crops like broccoli and cabbage, radishes and carrots also are good for fall. So you can see that there's different things, there's different growing periods for different plants. So you can look at that and hopefully it helps you this growing season as well. A lot of gardeners want to start their seeds inside, especially seeing that a lot of our plants we can start inside, and it's really more expensive to buy transplants at the store, but it's also a little bit more intensive to grow them on your own too. So just a few considerations before you dive into it is thinking about the space that you have. So, you know, a lot of times when I visualize like how much space I need, I just think about those flats that I see in a garden store, and that I could grow like 20 tomato plants in one of those plats. But thinking about especially if you're going to have something like tomatoes or peppers, which are going to need to be growing inside a little bit longer and are going to need to be transplanted into bigger pots, and that those pots want to be away from each other so that the leaves from one plant aren't contaminated or touching another one, you're going to have some space issues. And so it's best to look at your seed packet and the spacing that it suggests for mature plants in a garden. You're probably going to want to plan for having that amount of space in your house to have your tomatoes or peppers so that they're set apart eventually. Even if you can start in a small area, you'll want to think about in the next 6 weeks, I'm probably going to need to expand the area that these seedlings are in. You also want to think about your lighting. I know a lot of people just want to put seedlings in a window, but really it's best to have some kind of supplemental light. There are LEDs, which are really good, but those are kind of expensive. I've heard that T5 fluorescents are almost as good as LEDs, and they're a lot cheaper. So that is something to look into, but you'll want some kind of supplemental light. Watering is really important for germination. Seeds need to have even water so that they can sprout and become plants. However, you also don't want to make those waterlogged and too wet, because that could create a lot of disease issues that you'll run into. So finding a good balance there. Potting mix, using potting mix instead of garden soil is really important to prevent diseases as well. And for some plants, especially the ones that you would grow for summertime, like peppers, they'll want some kind of supplemental heat pad underneath them usually to make sure that the soil temperature is good and warm enough for them. Some common problems that you'll see, number one would be damping off, which is caused by fungus. A lot of times it's from just really cool and moist conditions. So making sure that you're not overwatering your plants is important. Making sure that they have supplemental light and making sure that they are warm enough is also important. So even if you don't necessarily need a heat pad under them, just maybe moving them into a location where it's not as drafty, and just making sure that the conditions are good. There's really no, like once you see that your plants have damping off, which is, it mostly manifests in like a really thin part of the stem, but you could also just see kind of damp and unhealthy looking seedlings in general too that are signs of damping off. It's really hard to recover from that, so really prevention is the best bet. Also, I guess I didn't mention this, but making sure your containers are clean. So if you're using a plastic container year to year, making sure that you wash that really well beforehand is also really important. It's usually fine to just use soap and water and let it air dry, but some people do use a little bit of bleach in their solution as well. So poor germination is usually caused by lack of water, or maybe that the soil isn't warm enough, especially for those warm season crops. You'll also see a lot of plants that will bend, and that's basically them bending towards the light. So if you have them in a window, they're going to bend towards that window. So hopefully getting supplemental light, but also even if they are bending, like even if they have supplemental light, but they're also near a window and are kind of bending that way, just rotating them every few days and they'll eventually straighten out. It's also important to have the light be adjustable so that they can be closer to the soil surface at the beginning, and then you can raise this light up as they get taller, which means that the plants won't really have to stretch for that light as much. And so, yeah, we talked about growing temperature and leggy. That means like basically that they've been stretching for the light. So making sure that the light is easily accessible for them and they don't have to bend or stretch up to get that. A lot of people also skip on hardening off, which is basically just getting your plants adjusted to life outside, like the sun and the wind and, a variety of temperatures throughout the day. So it's good to get your plants used to that. You can just start by taking your seedlings out to a protected location for about an hour a day and then increasing that an hour or two each day. You'll want to start the hardening off process when the seedlings are about probably a month old. So just a couple of weeks before you're gonna transplant them into your garden. And hopefully by the end, they can be out all day. If it's a warm season crop, you can even have them out at night some, and you can take some of them out into the direct sunlight a little bit too, which is different than the shade. If you're unable to harden off your plants, you can have like a fan inside that helps them get used to the wind, and transplanting them on a cloudy day is really beneficial. You also just might want to use some cover on them the first few days that they're out so that they aren't exposed to direct sunlight all day for the first few days. But overall, even if you have hardened off your plants, it is best to try to transplant on a cloudy day, just so that they aren't, in the shade and then out in the full sun all day. You'll want to weed your area beforehand and maybe water it if it's really, really dry. You'll dig a hole and you'll see the different depths in the pictures. So for most plants, it's basically just the depth of the seedling transplant that you want to put in there. But for tomatoes, you're going to want to dig the hole deeper because all of the little hairs on the stems of tomatoes can actually become roots, and that'll make your plant stronger if they are planted deeper and have those big roots. So some good plants to start with. These are actually pictures of my daughter, by the way. I find that a lot of the pictures that I have of my garden include my daughter, so you'll see a few of those. But yeah, just these are a list of some plants that I have had really good luck with. So for tomatoes, making sure that you stick with determinate varieties versus indeterminate. Determinate varieties basically just means that they grow to a certain point and they stop and start bearing fruit. Whereas indeterminate would mean that they would just keep on growing. And they're great. I mean, a lot of heirloom tomatoes are indeterminate. And I mean, if you want to go that route, just making sure that you have a really large cage or something to support them. But for starting out, especially if you're just storing in 5-gallon buckets or something, you're going to want to make sure that you get a determinate variety. And there are also disease-resistant varieties to check out. I seem to have a lot of issues with tomatoes, and I think a lot of people run into those. So it's good to start out with some disease-resistant varieties. For peppers, I have a hard time growing bell peppers, or at least just getting a lot out of them. So the varieties that I would recommend would be hot peppers. Those always seem to be pretty prolific in producing lots of fruit. If you don't really like the spicy factor of hot peppers, shishito peppers are a lot milder. They aren't as sweet as like bell peppers, but they aren't too hot for the most part. Shishito peppers are actually kind of odd in that every like 100 peppers that they put out, they'll put out a couple of spicy ones. So you'll want to be careful when you're cooking and maybe taste just like a little bit of each one of them to make sure you're not loading up your dish with hot peppers if you're not a big fan of that. But shishitos are pretty great. And they also have thin skins and are just like really easy to cook with. If you do want a sweet pepper, I suggest lunchbox peppers or mini bells, which produce a lot more than the big bell peppers that you would see, but are also very tasty like that. I've never really had a problem with basil. I always love to grow that, and it's always better than what I can get at the grocery store too. So I always grow basil, and a lot of herbs are also pretty hardy. Don't get a whole lot of disease and pest issues. Swiss chard is a really good green to grow because it doesn't get, kind of tough and bitter in the summertime, like a lot of things do, like spinach and a lot of greens. Swiss chard is really good. You can plant it in the spring and it'll be good until the fall. Sweet potatoes are something that I've always had really good luck with too. And they don't require as much maintenance in the summertime as like tomatoes do, which is really nice. And you can harvest them in the fall. They're really fun to harvest. You can also eat the leaves on sweet potatoes if you want to explore that. So that's another way to get some greens in and eat them before you can harvest all the tubers. Green beans are always pretty good for me. I do get a lot of issues with spider mites, but they still seem to keep producing for me into the fall. Onions are really good by themselves, but also they're really good companion plants and warding off different pest issues for your other vegetables. I also like to grow radishes, especially with kids, because they germinate pretty easily and they just grow really quickly. I wasn't a huge fan of radishes at the beginning, but I've tried a lot of different varieties. And this picture on the left is actually my favorite kind of variety of radishes. They're French breakfast radishes, and they're very good with herbed butter. But yeah, there's a bunch of different kinds of radishes. And then squash, I always have problems with vine borers for squash, and it's pretty hard to prevent. So I recently found this variety of squash called Tromboncino, which is resistant to vine borers. And so it's a really great kind of squash to grow. You can grow it like when you pick it like it's young, like my daughter is holding up, that's a young one. And it's similar to like a zucchini or another kind of summer squash. It's a little bit firmer, but you can use it in a similar way. And then you can also let them fully mature and get, kind of that brown skin on them, kind of like a butternut squash or another kind of winter squash. And you can pick them then and they can last all winter and they get huge if you let them mature on the plant. I still have a couple in my basement that I'm working on. And like when I cut into one of them, it's like meal for the whole week as far as the squash. It's also really nice because the seeds are all kind of in that one bulbous end that you might be able to see. But if you want to, you could just like cut that off and eat the rest of the squash, and you don't have to like scoop out the seeds. If you pick it as an unripe squash, like in the middle of summer, then you should pick them before they get seeds. So that shouldn't be an issue. But as far as like a winter squash, it's nice to not have to scoop out the seeds necessarily. So those are my favorite varieties to grow. And then I just also kind of wanted to talk about selecting healthy plants, especially if you know, as I was going over seed starting, it sounds a little bit more complicated than what you originally thought. It's fine to just go ahead and buy your transplants, especially if you have a small garden, but there are some things to look for. So these two tomato plants they both look pretty healthy, but the better one to get would probably be the shorter, stockier one, which means that you know, it had like adequate light that was right there for the plant. It had enough space to grow. It looks really healthy, and it's actually probably going to, once you get into the garden, it's probably going to outgrow those bigger ones that you would get at the store. So you might be tempted to buy a tomato plant that has like flowers already on it, but that is actually a sign that it's stressed out. And you know, those bigger plants really don't have enough space in a store. So it's good to stick with those, you know, dark green, short, stocky ones. Those are usually the healthier ones. You'll also just want to make sure that there's no yellowing of the leaves or like brown parts on it or anything like that. And then my last note is just on watering. So when you water your plants, make sure you're watering the roots and not the leaves. The roots are actually what take up the water, and the leaves, you know, if you have water on there, there's more potential for disease or even just for like sunburn from the sun as the light is reflected off of it. So yeah, making sure that you try to, even if you're using a watering can or a hose, just trying to get to that base of the plant. Drip irrigation is also really great if you want to get that in your garden. Making sure that you're watering, you know, infrequently and deeply. So, you know, not just watering a little bit every single day, but instead watering quite a bit every few days. And I don't have like a strict number to go to, because it all just varies by what kind of plant you have and the weather and that your garden is going through. But that's a general rule of thumb is once your plant matures, you're just going to want to water it basically when it needs it, so that those roots get strong and are used to growing down deep to get water versus being, you know, shallow roots that are used to water all the time. When you do just like put seeds out in your garden, you are going to want to water those every day just for that germination period, and a little bit more when they're younger seedlings. But as they mature, you're going to want to water them less. And then just making sure that you're watering in the morning, so that if there is any water on the leaves, that can dry out before there are disease issues. And, you know, just so that the plants have water for during the day when they're growing and need that water. So I'm sure there are a lot of questions. So the chat was getting pretty populated. That's my contact information if I am unable to answer your questions. But Susan, you can start letting me know what questions have been typed in.
Okay, so folks, you're welcome to stay for the question session. And if you are signed up for the next class, then you'll need to find the link in your email for those future classes, the email you received earlier this week. So to go back through the questions we have, we'll circle back when we first talked about containers. There was a question: do some vegetables do better or worse in containers? And then does a metal container impact growth?
So to answer that question, yes, I mean, there are definitely some varieties of plants that are better for containers. So like there are some varieties of tomatoes that are better for containers. You'll see some varieties that are called like Space Master that are good for growing in small spaces. I grow a lot of herbs in containers. There are quite a few things that you can grow into containers, but like I said, squash and pumpkins and stuff like that. Those are really large plants that like to travel. So those aren't great for small containers unless there's some specific variety. There might be like a variety of zucchini that does better in small spaces because it doesn't need to travel as much. But yeah, I would say that in most stores or in seed catalogs, you can find varieties of a lot of types of vegetables that are good in containers. There's a book that I really like called the Vegetable Gardener's Container Bible, I think is what it's called. And that is really good about how to make your own self-watering container, but also just varieties that do really well in containers. I've never had a problem with, I've never tried to grow in a metal container, and I'm not sure that it would cause issues. You just might want to make sure that a container that isn't, designed for gardening is food grade, so it's not leaching contaminants into your container. But that is the main thing that I would be concerned about.
Okay. Our next question from Diane asked about weed killers. Can you use weed killer in a raised bed? Because she has some relentless weeds to deal with.
That's a good question. And I mean, I usually don't use any kind of herbicides. I feel like I could talk to some of my colleagues that know more about that, but I would not think that would work well because, herbicides generally would be killing a lot of different kinds of plants. I've heard, I guess, for like no-till gardens, a lot of, no-till farming, some people spray to get the weeds down. So maybe spraying before, like a few weeks before you transplant or direct seed your vegetable crop in there. But I definitely don't think that I would recommend doing it at the same time as having vegetables in there.
Okay. Our next question is from Carol. She asked, what is a range of cost for soil testing?
For the basic things that I put on that slide, it should only probably be like $35, I would think, to just test for nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, organic matter, and pH. Maybe a little bit more than that. If you're gonna test for like heavy metals, if you're living in an urban area or somewhere that you're concerned about that, that's going to cost a bit more. So, and I'm not sure about the pricing for that. We don't like have a soil lab within Extension. So you really will have to look at one of those resource sheets and just reach out to the different soil labs. But I don't think the main things that I put on that slide shouldn't cost that much money. For heavy metals, I live in St. Louis, and my gardening organization just recommended that instead of testing for heavy metals, to just use that money to buy a raised bed because it's probably there and it's probably going to take you a lot of money to find out exactly what. But I mean, it's really hard to recover from like heavy metals in your soil. So,
okay. Our next questions are about lighting. Faith asked about how long do you keep lights on? I think it was at the point of presentation where you had the seedlings going.
Yeah, okay, that's a good question too. I would do it maybe around 12 to 16 hours a day.
Okay. And then Terry asked a similar question about lighting. Do I need a special light or can ordinary fluorescent be used? She has something like an 8-foot long space.
Yeah, so ordinary fluorescents work fine. And like I said, the T5 fluorescents, I've heard good things about those. But yeah, they should work just fine. I think LED would probably be better, but if that's what you have or have access to, that's fine.
Okay. Then we have some questions about containers. I'm sorry about the pronunciation here. Ariri asks, can you use glass containers to start seedlings? And then a similar question is, what containers do you use to start seedlings?
Yeah,
Tara.
so glass containers would be fun, except for that you will want drainage holes, and I don't really know how you could like drill into glass. But if for some reason, if a glass container already had holes, that would be fine. But that would be my main concern. And other kinds of materials. So I've used like peat pots before, and those are nice because you don't really have to like, turn a plant upside down to transplant it. You can just put the whole thing in there. Although with peat pots, you're going to want to take the top off so that it's not like sticking out of your garden, because that's going to be wicking moisture away from your plant. So this isn't really a concern when you're starting inside, but when you transplant it outside, just rip that top off to make sure that it's not sticking out. I've also recently just heard a lot of kind of issues with peat production, or I guess peat extraction from peat bogs, which are really good carbon sinks. And so as far as environmentally friendly products, I've heard that like coconut coir is similar in that they are making some pots out of coconut coir, which is like a byproduct of harvesting coconuts. So it's a little bit more environmentally friendly. And then I've also heard of I don't remember what they're called, but they're basically like compressed cow manure, but it's dried out. It's totally safe to be handling it. But that's another maybe another material that you could look into that's similar to a peat pot, but that isn't made out of peat. A lot of people just use plastic containers that you could buy at a store or that you may have sitting around at your house, especially if you've gardened for a few years. So just making sure that you wash those out before you use them again. But those are the main ones that I've seen would be like peat pot or some material close to peat, or using plastic containers.